Alright, now to continue where we left off from Quitters Incorporated, the second story that's told in Cat's Eye is The Ledge, which actually comes before Quitters Incorporated and Night Shift, as we said, but the movie has a pretty nice flow to it, so I can get putting them in a different order, but here, to talk about it specifically, it is kind of similar. It feels a little similar to King's story we saw that he had also written the script for, which was a story in Creepshow, the one Something to Tide You Over, which is my favorite story in Creepshow. It kind of has a similar vibe, actually a very similar vibe to this story as well, where you have the woman who's married to the sort of overbearing older guy, so she starts cheating with the younger guy, and then her older husband takes revenge in a sadistic way. And here we actually start off with, because the whole thing is about the husband sort of being into betting and wagering. He much prefers the term wager in the story, but for some reason says bet throughout the movie. But he makes it a point to say that in the story. But whatever. And I like the way the movie starts off because the story starts off with just us in the apartment, and we're pretty much already in the middle of it when the story starts. But the movie almost gives us a bit of a prologue before this happens, where we get to see Norris actually captured by him and taken to the apartment. But before that, we have, because the whole thing with Cat's Eye was they kind of worked the cat into each individual story as it went. And this opening is him basically betting on this cat's life, where he makes a bet with a guy whether the cat can cross the street or not. And it's a really interesting sort of introduction to that character. And worth noting again, as we mentioned in Quarters Incorporated, that King did write the script for Cat's Eye, so it's like he's adapting himself and sort of adding these new little flourishes to his story that already exists, that he already wrote, which is interesting. So, and when we get the stuff like how we don't immediately start in the apartment like we do in the story, we get shots like when they drive up to the building and he's like laying in the car, and we get that foreboding look up when he looks up at the guy right before he's pulled out of the car, and we see just how tall the building is from that kind of perspective, which obviously we'll be seeing from the opposite perspective for most of the story. So once he's in there, what's interesting that King does here is, as far as the story being more effective, because obviously it's one thing to be able to actually see it in the movie, and you would think the effect would be there entirely, and it would be much more sort of terrifying to actually see rather than just read in text. But the way King describes so much of this stuff, I think actually makes the story infinitely more terrifying. Because the thing is as he's describing how the layout of the apartment, it's almost like he's building up to what the drop is and how far it goes. Because the way he starts off is it's like he says there's a window, but the window's so big it's actually, a glass wall, and then there's a balcony outside that's the size of a postage stamp, I think is the way he describes it. And then it finally gets to, there's 43 stories, and the ledge is only 5 inches. And then what's really great about this is that the descriptions keep going as he starts to get out on, like, every time. And because the thing about the story is it's much more about the sort of mind game aspect between the two of them. And so it's like even once he's got him on the ledge, like that's not the end of the torture. Like if anything, it's just the start of it. It's just the foundation of the torture. Just kind of play mind games with him at the same time. And so you hear that the ledge is only 5 inches and we're 43 stories up, and that should be enough. Like that's more or less where the movie leaves it, and then we just watch it happen. But the elements that they add, there's just something so evil about it in this really great way. Like you want to applaud King for how evil this setup is when it initially seems so simple yet still terrifying. Because we add in the cold of it, which the movie doesn't really touch on too much, but it gets real specific, saying like, because he can see a bank's like, board where everything scrolls by, and apparently it's 44 degrees, and there's like a chill factor in the mid 20s. and the wind is going, but the thing is the building is so high that there's no, where they are, there's no other buildings blocking it because it's taller. So the wind is unobstructed. So, and then they just keep adding and adding, and it's like, oh, by the way, because the wind, you know, is so strong, that there might be occasions where you can feel the building rock a little bit. And it's just all these things keep piling on that you would not want to hear if you were in this scenario. And it's, like I said, it's so incredibly wicked in the best possible way. To take a concept that is so simple and to just be able to put those little details in it that just make it worse and worse as you go. And then talking about, because obviously, as I'm sure many people can say the same, I really don't do the heights thing. I just, it's always been a problem, whether it be, there's the whole thing where you can't look down. I also can't look up at high things. It's a whole, it's a terrible, terrible thing. So the first time I read this story, and it talks about how he grabs onto the wall, and just when he starts to grip the wall after he's gotten away from the balcony, I felt like I was gonna faint reading this because it's so vivid. And then you, like I said, you add in all these other obstacles. And then, like I said, you add in the mind games also, where he's talking about, you know, hey, how do I know I'll go all the way around the ledge and come back, that you'll give me the money and the woman that you promised? And once he's out there, he says, oh, by the way, you know, I lie about a lot of things, you know. Just so you know, just throwing that out there. And then he's like eating an apple that he throws over the ledge, and then the whole anticipating the sound, and the sound takes forever to come of it hitting the ground. And it's, yeah, and that's the great thing, is that there's nothing supernatural in this story, but you can feel the way, like, the way King brings the supernatural to life and but he does it with such description and surrounds it with such a story that it makes the supernatural elements in his supernatural stories feel so incredibly real. And like you're actually there, no matter how fantastical whatever is going on is, or how, you know, yeah, just outrageous whatever it would be. But here he takes something that's not supernatural at all, but seems to use the same techniques as far as setting it up, and with every single little detail makes it feel more and more real. And then it's, yeah, and how he is able to use those same abilities to place you right there in this terrifying place is masterful, really. But that's the thing also, is while it doesn't get supernatural, it hints at the possibility, because at this point, you know, your mind is racing in all directions. And he gets to the idea where the wind starts to get so, you know, brutal against him, it actually goes through his mind. It's like, it almost is like a supernatural thing, that the wind is like working for the other guy. Like the wind is actually working in the other guy's favor intentionally. And it's, yeah, and then as far as, and I love the way we just kind of go through that in the story. In the movie, they make the mistake of cutting away a couple of times, where we cut away to the husband in the, Kressner is his name, I kept forgetting it, is in the apartment, and he's going around, he's, you know, finding ways to fuck with him while he's out there. He's got, you know, the horn and all that. I think it's a party blower in the story. And it's like, I wouldn't cut away from the ledge at all once he's out there. Even if it's to show, you know, like, oh, he's going to do something to mess with him. Just do what the story does. Just have him, like, or other things, like, up here. Like, from his perspective. Because it makes, like, you never quite know what's coming. And they kind of start to play with that, like, when he shows up with the hose later. Because that's, and imagine if the cold had been established in the movie, and then he did the hose thing. Jesus. But that's the thing, is obviously, while we can do the more psychological stuff in the story, the movie has to play more with the visual medium, so obviously the obstacles are going to be a bit, you know, bigger in that sense, and a little less subtle, which is fine because they're making a movie and it's the visual medium and all that. So we do have big moments like him falling that one time and like barely catching himself, or when he's held onto the light, and then the light like comes down and it becomes this whole thing. Yeah, so I do think it's there's more of a genuine terror in the story, and I think that really comes through. But I feel like as far as adapting it to the screen and having to make those, bigger visual obstacles work, it did what it needed to do. But it has more of I don't know if it, like, by the time you think of it, it almost has more of an action-y vibe than a scary vibe, which is, like I said, as far as adaptation goes, it's probably the best they could do with what they had to work with. But the way you can tell this story in just text is obviously gonna shine through much more. But there are cases where the movie found a way to do something else. For instance, because obviously we talked about, the progression of them, so that the obstacles get progressively bigger in the movie makes a lot of sense also. But then we get our final payoff, which King decided to go all out for. I'm really I wonder if he regrets not ending the story this way, or how this happened. But in the story, it's this pretty... well, I guess the point of the story is the potential ambiguity, because the whole thing of because he starts off by saying, I lie about a lot of things, just so you know. But he just straight up says, oh, by the way, here's your money, but we killed her. We found her and we killed her, so you only get one of the things. But, I mean, you can have her. She's at the morgue, you can go get her. So technically, I'm giving you what you wanted. I'm giving you what you promised, just maybe not in the way that you expected. And then it's never truly revealed. We never actually see her. So there could be an ambiguous nature to that. The movie absolutely took another turn. And one that's... I mean, I can appreciate, ambiguity and, the terror that it can set up. But just the relentlessness of the ending of the segment in the movie, when it's the bag of money, and he says, well, I'm giving you what you promised. Here's your money, and you have the girl as well. And he tips the bag over, and her head comes rolling out of it. And that is something where, I seriously think when King was adapting this into script form, he had to be thinking, God, I wish I'd ended the story this way. But, like I said, if you appreciate ambiguity, you're probably going to appreciate the ending of the story more, but... I don't know, I just love the absolute, total, and complete gut punch that the movie took. So, I can certainly appreciate both, but overall, still, I would say it's a story that's much better handled in a psychological nature rather than, seeing it in movie form and then having to movieify it a little bit by adding bigger obstacles. But regardless, it's definitely a story that works. And like I said, a great example of how King can take just the simplest concept and turn it into something totally and completely sadistic, which we will always love him for. So that's, I think, it for this one. The next one is going to be, I think we're going to talk about another Tales from the Dark Side episode that's from a story in Skeleton Crew, and then we've got more movies coming on top of that. And all the other stuff that's coming, more verses, the videos with my brother, all that kind of stuff. So until all of that stuff, I think that's it for this.